Recording. Okay, just love a confirmation when I can get one. Now we're going to share again. Welcome, everyone. For those in the room, sorry about seeing the excess on the screen. As you know, I have a 2-monitor computer, and unfortunately, that means that I can't get it to line up perfectly in the room, but everybody else who's on the call is hopefully seeing a good view. Okay, so the what's up for May is about Hubble. And this could be a little intimidating because I know that there are people who will be on this call who know a lot more about Hubble than me, which is good because maybe you can answer questions. However, I keep the what's up basics real high level so that those who maybe aren't feeling as up on some topics are feeling welcome and all that good stuff. So the Hubble launched April 24th, 1990. That makes this the 300th, the 35th anniversary. I wish, right? I hope she lasts that long. I'm not sure she will. We'll start that from the beginning, I hope. There we go. I could do this. Okay. It's back here. I thought that kind of summed it up pretty well. We also have a cool little logo for the 35th anniversary. And thank you to Jennifer Wiseman, who put in the chat some of the URLs for what we just played and whatnot. So the space crew on Discovery is the crew STS-31 are the ones who helped to make Hubble possible. I don't think we want to show that. No, we don't. Forgive me. As you know, Hubble had a little problem with its seeing when first sent up, and so it required some missions to take care of that. So that's first servicing mission. Here you see the astronaut, F. Story Musgrave, going out to the end of the arm, and he's preparing to elevate the top of the Hubble telescope to install the protective covers on the magnetometers, which we just talked about 2 weeks ago, the land-based ones. And the mission was pretty critical to Hubble's future and installed hardware that compensated for the flawed mirror. So as you know, the backstory, it was an intern who was at NASA and suggested that since the vision was blurry, perhaps Hubble needed glasses, and it worked. And the politicians who make sure the funding happened were very pleased with that. So on the left, you have the picture of what it looked like before Hubble got its glasses, and then the picture afterwards, and that was January of '94. So it took a little bit of time to get those glasses made. This is our former Maryland Senator Barbara Mikulski. A lot of big news then. The final mission, here we have Mike Mess, I'm going to butcher his name. Okay, louder.
Massimino.
Thank you. He participated in a 4th spacewalk to continue to refurbish and upgrade it. And as we know, some of those computers are still 1990s grade, but they're working. So that's to our benefit. So what's the future? Hubble telescopes revolutionized our understanding, and to date, approximately 1.7 million observations have been taken. Still, it's only viewed 1/10 of 1% of the sky. With redundancy in its systems and workarounds in place to handle future failures, Hubble will continue exploring the other 99.9% of the sky, which is not to say it will accomplish the other 99.9% of the sky well into the 2030s if nothing else bad happens. We already know that it's low enough in orbit that it is affected by the Starlink satellites photobombing it. So I want to point out that there is on the NASA website, you go to nasa.gov and just search, tons of free downloadable images and ebooks. And those ebooks have lovely images. So if you want to stroll through some or save some on a hard drive in case for some reason those things get pulled down, because you never know with the government these days, do know that they are available. Also, we have outreach planned for Astronomy Festival on the National Mall on September 20th of this year. Last year, it was, I think, in July and 103 degrees, so they moved it indoors. And with thousands and thousands of people, that was a little cramped. So they moved it to a better temperature time, but there will be representatives from the Hubble mission there on the mall, as well as WASI members, and you're welcome to come too, with telescopes helping everybody see the night sky. So know that that's there. Now, I've mentioned in prior months, and I mention explicitly here tonight because it's important to us as viewers, both imagers and observational amateur astronomers, that there is a NASA Hubble monthly challenge going on for objects in the sky. And the way that works is each month, the Hubble folks put up on their website, just look for Hubble Challenge on the nasa.gov, a set of images, both northern and southern hemisphere. And what they'd like you to do for your astronomy pleasure and viewing is to, during that month, go and try and take a look. Now, the past couple months in Maryland, we've only had about one clear night a week, maybe two, if you don't mind looking through some haziness. So get it while you can. So what you're doing is you're looking at the object. They do give you finder maps on the websites that are fine because they're not really obscure. And they ask you to either draw or image the picture. Now, the Astronomical League, everybody who's a member here at WASI is also a member of the Astronomical League, is running a concurrent NASA challenge. You can submit your drawing or image with the NASA image with the URL and put a box around your image or drawing of the part of your picture that matches what's in the Hubble picture. And that does two things. It enters you into the challenge for the month. You can earn certificates, or if you did it all year, you can earn a pin as well. But it also gives you a chance to really look at what it is that you're seeing and what the Hubble is seeing, a real one-for-one comparison. Now, they've picked a lot of M objects and some Caldwell objects, so they're not really tiny and obscure. And so some basic telescopes and binoculars even can put you in the running for being able to see some of these things. Really want to strongly encourage folks, and I want to also show you what a submission looks like. I've been doing them each month since they started. And what you have here is 2 pages of submission. So on the top here, you have what Hubble saw for the Whale Galaxy, which is a Caldwell object number 32. Here is one of many finder charts that NASA published on their webpage to show you where to look. So Ursa Major, as you know, is a constellation, and the asterism that we all know is Big Dipper. So if you pick out the part of the Big Dipper here, that's the dipper in the handle, and you do a little bit of star hopping, and you remember that arc to Arcturus, which brings you over to Boötes, you can begin to piece out some star hopping to find that C32 object. So I did with my Celestron Origin, which is one of those EAA computer scopes. And again, you can do a drawing. Fuzzy blobs are perfectly acceptable and welcomed. I did my picture. I had to blow it up quite a bit because the field of view on Hubble is considerably smaller. And using the different parts of the Hubble image, did my best to put a box around my image that represented the part of the Hubble image that I saw. And of course, with any of the Astronomical League submissions for observations, you want to put in your date, your location, preferably lat and long, your scene quality, transparency. Moon is extra if you want to make a note of that. What scope you used, what focal length, its aperture, its F ratio, field of view, and if you did imaging, what exactly happened for creating that image. And in my case, it stacked 10-second exposures for a total of 680 seconds. It's a comparatively brighter object, so I didn't need it to run all that long to get what I was looking for. I know the astrophotographers in the room can pull out a lot more detail. Same thing with M64, the black eye galaxy. This is the Hubble version. And you can see not only what great detail the Hubble scope got, but also what the graphic artists at NASA did with it in terms of the colors and that kind of thing. Again, a finder's chart, and you have Hercules and Boötes, and then you're going over to little teeny tiny Como Berenices over here to find M64. So again, my scope with all the data and a box around the best landmarks that I could find compared to the Hubble image. Eminently doable, lots of fun, a great way to really take a look at what you're doing compared to what the big space telescopes are doing. And it's thanks to the technology of Hubble that we have all this great software and algorithms and stuff that give us this opportunity to see things more in depth today. Okay, so real quick to the night sky for what's up for May. Want to point out that we have a few things happening. If you've been out on those 1 or 2 nights in each of the past few weeks, you've probably seen rising over your trees in the distance that Vega is returning. And Vega is rising in the east, and this chart always shows early May, 10 p.m., late May, 9 p.m. I do have a couple copies of the chart on the table, but you can always get them from skymaps.com. We also have Albireo, a nice blue gold double star cluster, and the neck of, or the head of Cygnus Swan that's rising as well. Both are signs that, in fact, summer is returning to us, and in ancient traditions was part of some traditions indicating that it was time to do something with their crops. We also have M104 in the sky, just to the west of Spica. And you find Spica by going back to your Big Dipper. It's arc to Arcturus and Boötes and speed on to Spica. And remember that this whole bit of sky here is just rich with galaxies. One night last week when the clouds parted for a little bit, I was up in Leo Minor myself, and there's a good number of Herschel objects, which are galaxies, which are up in that area that I was capturing, and some really kind of unusual ones too. So fun stuff there. And of course, on the flip side, you always have some tips for naked eye binoculars and telescopes. And in the case of binoculars, remember tripod or arms braced on the arms of a chair are best, because you're never going to be perfectly still, and you don't want to be, because your heart continues to beat and that makes you move. And that's a good thing. So let's see. We have a great object here in Scorpius that's coming up with the summer months, M4. If you like to see a bouquet of diamonds, that's a great globular cluster. I mentioned Albireo, and we also have an eclipsing binary in Lyra that you can look for. And of course, 104. And if you remember 104 over here, 104, if you can find Spica and some of these stars, you can do a little star hopping. 104 is the sombrero, which is one of those striking objects that once you see it through a telescope is memorable, like seeing Saturn for the first time. Okay, so that brings us there. It's also a great way to do some star hopping, which is a great intro to using even better and larger star maps. And a future What's Up, we're going to have a presentation by our own Chris Bennett, who will go over some of those online star maps and tools. Also know that out there's a number of great resources we have on our website, outreach resources where you can pull up a bunch of things, including NASA posters and whatnot. Know that the Globe at Night is a fantastic citizen science project During the non-moonlit nights, which they have outlined here, you can go out, take a look at the constellation, count up the number of stars that you can see after your eyes have been adapted, and you can report that on Globe at Night, globeatnights.org. They want your data because the data from Earth is better than the data from satellites in measuring light pollution. Also, there's many different resources like dateandtime.com for moon phases. And also, as members of Night Sky Network, you have lots of resources, including the meteor shower handout, which shows the dates for that. We do offer to clubs the Hubble pictures, which you see here, which Skip sends out on behalf of the ASP, and for which we have some on the table here for you tonight. So let me pause there and ask if there are any questions for the What's Up for tonight. Yes.
I think up above when you had those challenge objects, I think there was a picture of the sombrero, wasn't there? Yeah.
Right here. Here's 104 sombrero. Okay, so I'll pause there and let me say that before we get to our main speaker tonight, that we do have a sign up for members. If you could sign in on the back of the room. If you're not a member, welcome. We love new members. There's also a sign-in sheet if you want to share your email for notices for future events. If you're interested, we have a door prize drawings, 4 different drawings in the back. You need to pick 2 sets of tickets. Keep the one that says, keep this coupon. I have to tell people that, yes. It's best if you put your name on it. If you don't, that's okay. Just keep your number handy. The table closest to me has lots of freebies, including some glass slugs. Please take lots. If you're ever outside doing outreach, they're especially good for paperweights, but they're also just cool looking, and we need to find homes for them. If you have not gotten your Night Sky Network pin from last year, see me. If you need your WASI pin, membership pin, or lanyard, see me. We'll take about an 8-minute break, and then we'll get back together and we'll have more notices of that after our speaker. So I will pause the recording. Welcome back, and we will have another break after our speaker, so there'll be time to chat and take care of business then. But Kurt, would you like to introduce our speaker, please?
Okay, our speaker tonight, Mark Shelhamer. He is a professor at Johns Hopkins University's School of Medicine with a BS and MS in electrical engineering from Drexel, and he got his PhD in biomedical engineering at MIT. He's been chief scientist at the NASA's Human Research Program, where he oversaw NASA's research portfolio for maintaining health and performance in long-duration spaceflight. So it's really space medicine. He also has a research program devoted to the multi-system and cross-disciplinary interactions that contribute to personal and mission resilience in spaceflight. Now, his topic is about going to Mars. As you know, NASA and also SpaceX and maybe a couple others are planning to be sending manned missions to Mars, perhaps in the next decade. And a journey to Mars will take about 3 years. Will have an impact on every physiological, psychological, and cognitive system in the body. So there's quite a bit to discuss there. So here he is.
Thank you. You're an easy audience. I give applause before I actually do anything. I usually get that advantage. I gotta say, before I get into the main topic here, this is already a little bit freaky for me because it's Hubble right here, apparently. And you mentioned a little bit earlier that a URL for some Hubble related things was posted in the chat by Jennifer Wiseman. Jennifer Wiseman is my wife, and she's a scientist for the Hubble Space.
Let's give Jennifer a hand too.
Yes, and she says two things. First of all, she says, if you meet the full Hubble Night Sky Challenge and get a certificate that she has signed, might be a big deal, it's not such a big deal to me. And then she also says she sees me and a big model of Hubble on the camera, two of her favorite things. Okay. Now, the other thing I wanted to mention, you heard the name Mike Massimino a little bit earlier. He was one of the astronauts on the last servicing mission to Hubble, and it was 15 years ago, something like that. My wife supported that mission. She was in mission control, helping out, monitoring it. Mike Massimino and I overlapped for a time in graduate school. We weren't in the same class, in the same department, but we got to be colleagues. He actually shared an apartment with a very close friend of mine. And the reason I mention this is because this is very relevant to a question that you might ask me near the end of my talk, which is, given all the interesting and challenging things that I'm going to tell you about sending humans to Mars, why do we bother? Why will we bother sending humans to Mars? It's a great question. There's multiple answers. My main answer is that sending humans will make the mission overall more resilient and more successful, more able to deal with the unknown than if you don't send humans. An example, case in point, there is a time on that last servicing mission when Mike Massimino had to open an access door to get into his telescope. And my recollection is that it was blocked by a handrail. Handrail was put there to help the astronauts service something, but the screws would not come out. So he had no choice if he was to proceed with servicing than to actually, this is what you would do in your garage, fixing your car. Not a new car, this was complete. You have no choice but to actually bend the handrail back and forth until it broke at the fracture point. Now, I'm going to conjecture that if you had sent a robotic manipulator up to repair Hubble, it probably would not have been programmed with that amount of force, because that amount of force would break the telescope if it were not properly applied. But you had a human there to do it. So that's just one example, kind of a setup for me, how humans might endow a mission with resilience. Okay, I'm going to talk more broadly about the crazy things that happen to the human body and brain when people go into space. And although there's a lot of talk now since the inauguration, especially about sending humans to Mars, which I am all in favor of, and specifically about sending humans to Mars within the 4 years of the current administration, which is not going to happen. And I will tell you why, some of the reasons why that's not going to happen. Technically, just in terms of rockets alone, maybe we could do it within 4 years, but it would not be free. And some of those people, most of them, would not survive. So maybe within 10 years, we could do it with some conceivable measure of success. So, as you heard in the introduction, although I'm a spaceflight professionally, a spaceflight researcher, I get grants from NASA and NASA-related organizations to study human adaptation to space. Two general areas. One of them is related to the balance system, the vestibular system in the inner ear. Balance, spatial disorientation, space motion sickness, disorientation, those kinds of things. I'm not going to talk about that tonight. It's fascinating, trust me, and it has paid my mortgage for a number of years. But I'm going to talk more broadly about things that I learned when I was the chief scientist for the Human Research Program at NASA, and my job there was to oversee the entire portfolio, bone, muscles, radiation effects, psychological effects, things that you just generally don't even think of as being relevant to humans in space. So, as I sometimes say, that experience not only gave me the right, but actually gave me the obligation to pontificate about what it's like and how hard it's going to be to send people to Mars. And finally, last thing about that, I will say that even though I am wearing a shirt with a NASA logo on it, the opinions expressed here tonight are mine. They are not those of NASA, but they should be. All right, good. Okay, so let's go back a little bit and give some perspective, because the space, if you haven't been paying attention, the space program of the last decade or so is not like the early space program through the 60s and 70s. By the way, the space program, one way in which is radically different, the International Space Station has been continuously inhabited. Anyone want to take a guess for how long? How many years? 5 years?
21.
30? 30 is good. 25, actually. So we have had continuous human presence in space, low Earth orbit, for 25 years. That's striking. That's really something. So we might be tempted to call it routine. It is anything but routine, as you will see here. But at least we have a routine way to get there, get back, and keep people healthy and keep them busy up there. But in the early days, this was more of what space flight was like. The original 7 astronauts selected in 1959, up there in the upper right, the year I was born, by the way, and largely a kind of space jockey type of approach to things. These missions were, they were really out there. If you really want some interesting reading and you're a space nerd about this kind of stuff like I am, you can go online, go to Amazon, and buy the mission reports from all the early missions, including the Apollo missions, and you would be surprised at the stuff that goes wrong. Every single mission, they were out on the edge of what was possible there. It makes fascinating reading. Things have calmed down a little bit since then, since we're no longer in a Cold War race, or we might be one with China sometime soon. We're no longer in a Cold War race to get to the moon. So some of those risk calculations are different. So we had things like Saturn V that took astronauts to the moon and to the Skylab space station in the 1970s. And then we had the shuttle program for about 30 years. The longest of those flights, the longest of shuttle flights was 17 days. The longest of the Apollo lunar flights was 12 days, Apollo 17. And now we are routinely sending people to the International Space Station for 6 months at a time, more or less 6 months at a time. Sometimes it's 3 months, sometimes it's on the order of a year, sometimes they go with the intention of staying for 6 or 7 days, and they end up staying for over the 6 months. That's a very unfortunate circumstance, but it's telling in one sense. First of all, the system has the flexibility and the resilience to accommodate that change. But from my point of view, and those in my community, it's a little bit unfortunate because we like to do experiments and get medical and biomedical data off the people on the International Space Station when they spend that long period of time. But we weren't prepared for them. So we didn't get the base like that. And we didn't do the informed consent briefings and all of the kinds of things that you need to do research correctly. So in some sense, it's very unfortunate because it was a lost opportunity to do science on Butch and Sonny. And speaking of Sonny Williams, right there. So this is some of the stuff that goes on in the International Space Station. They're up there, they're exercising. Exercise I'll get to a little bit later, because without exercise, the body deteriorates dramatically in space. You lose muscle mass, you lose bone mineral density, the heart atrophies, can no longer pump blood up to the head, which is a problem when you come back to the gravity fields like Earth. So there's just some of the exercise equipment. It's actually possible to do the equivalent of weightlifting, even though weight is a mass. So this is essentially spring-loaded device. It's called the Advanced Resistive Exercise Device, treadmills. And of course, they sleep and they eat. It turns out eating up there in the center is really important as not only something for nutritional value and to stave off some of the deficiencies, some of the problems that develop like bone loss, muscle atrophy. But turns out eating, as we saw here, eating is a huge psychological countermeasure. So we use the word countermeasure in my business a lot. We're looking for countermeasures to the deconditioning effects of long duration spaceflight. So if you want to say, if you're tempted to say, well, when we go to Mars, which would probably be a 3-year mission, that's no problem. We just have to take 3 years worth of food bars, 3 years worth of protein bars. Yeah, you could do that, but no one's going to like it. They're not going to function well. Food is not only some of the comforts of home, but it's something that they look forward to, and it provides a meeting ground. What is it that you do when you want to celebrate a special occasion? Some people are doing it right here now. You get together for a meal somewhere with people, right? They do that on the International Space Station. That's what you're seeing up here. Those are really busy people. They have a lot to do. They run a lot of experiments. They do maintenance and operations on the space station all the time. And yet, they will make it a point, and I heard a ISS mission commander say this explicitly. He said, sometimes my crew members wouldn't see each other all day because they'd be all in different parts of the space station because it's pretty big. But I'm demanded that they get together at least for one meal a day, that we get together as a crew, at least for dinner. And food has improved dramatically since the early days. It's something that they actually look forward to eating, even though it is prepackaged, dehydrated.
Are those pictures that you had, are those actually taken in space or is that in a lab on Earth?
These?
Yeah.
These are, those are all in space. And, okay, so they eat, they exercise, so they drink. So what's the other side of the equation? You have to process the waste products in space. So there is a space toilet. Space toilet breaks down. That is the #1 priority to be fixed. If you drop what they're doing, figuratively speaking, you can't drop it into space. They figuratively drop what they're doing and fix that. But this device over here, anybody know what this is? That is the urine recycling device.
Oh, it's good.
So I don't know what the number is, but it's large. Something like 80 to 90% of urine is recycled, or as the astronauts like to say, this is the machine that turns yesterday's coffee into tomorrow's coffee. Okay, you have to get over the psychological barrier of doing that kind of thing, but astronauts are special people. They do that. That's an amazing technology. But you can see it's also a significant technology. So if that's the kind of thing that you're planning on taking to Mars, or if you really want to take to Mars, so you don't have to take 3 years worth of water, you have to make sure that that thing not only works, but you have the ability to fix it whenever it takes. So you start to see where some of the difficulties extrapolating from 6 months on the space station and low Earth orbit to a 3-year Mars mission, excuse me, where some of the failure points might be. But this is another compilation of pictures just meant to give the idea that the space station is like home to these people. If you're going out there, well, space station is, we say it's far from home. The orbit is on the order of 200 miles. It's not that far, right, from here to New York City. But considering the energy that it takes to get there and back, the fact that you can't just come home at a moment's notice, although pretty quickly if there's an emergency. Nevertheless, they're up there long enough with other people that they really want to make this home. So there are things that they do to make it home. So you can see playing musical instruments. Oh, Samantha Cristoforetti, that was an espresso machine. That was built by the Italians and sent out. So some of the comforts of home. So one of the points that I'd like to make here is when you start to think about something like a Mars mission, and I'll get into some of the details of what that mission will look like in a few minutes. You start to talk about a Mars mission, really far away from home, really long periods of time, not a regular crew turnover. You're starting to think about not just jamming 6 people into a recreation vehicle for a few months at a time. You're talking about recreating their universe, their home. Everything that's important to them has to be somehow represented. So anybody remember Maslow's hierarchy of human needs from school? So let's go off there on a little paper that we put together to start looking at long duration space missions in this way. Once you get past food, water, exercise, you start working up the pyramid until you get to things like, why am I here? Is this really the right thing to be doing? Is it worth the risk? Those kinds of more existential questions. Okay, astronauts know how to address those questions, otherwise they would not become astronauts. But still, the missions can be designed in a way that promotes these kinds of human attributes or makes them difficult. I would look for the former, given the choice. So here's an example. There is something called the overview effect. Gentleman Frank White's. He's not an author on that, okay? He coined the term decades ago. The overview effect is this, in many cases, overwhelming sensation, perception that astronauts have when they look at Earth from space. Especially some of the Apollo astronauts mentioned it because their perspective was much different because they were so much farther away. But it's just that the sense that Earth looks so fragile. It's the blue marble, right? It's just hanging out there in space. You don't see political borders. And there's this sense of this overwhelming sense of wanting to take care of the planet. And also the sense that we're all in this together. We may be squabbling here on Earth, but if you look at the big picture, maybe we should work together to take care of it. And, you know, astronauts are really kind of hardcore. They're not like touchy-feely types so much. So for astronauts to come back and report that, that must be a pretty powerful experience. This is the kind of thing that maybe you want to nurture to ease some of the burdens that I will get to on something like a Mars mission. Oh, because they're going to have to be dealing with things like this too. So this is, even though I don't have the entire header, you can see where this article came from, a professional journal, Aerospace Medicine and Human Performance. Operational considerations for crew fatality. In other words, what do you do with the body? You want to take a body bag? You can't just put a body bag in the corner. That body starts to decay and then gases. You stick it outside. Do you do the equivalent of a burial at sea? I don't know, but you have to think of not only the logistical parts of that operation, but also you need the mental set. And when the crew gets in the spacecraft, they have to be thinking to themselves, yes, there's a very real possibility that one of us will not come back from Mars alive. And we're not going to turn around and cut short the mission for reasons that I won't mention. So you have to start thinking about these things. I don't think I need to belabor this. You can identify Mars there. This obviously not to scale at all, not even close. This is at least to size scale. So gravity on Mars, 0.38 G, just about a third of what it is on Earth. Gravity on the Moon, about 1/6 G, 1/6. So about twice as much gravity. But the point is that it is really far away. So here's the idea. So this is to distance scale. And so, right, Moon to Earth, Earth to Moon, which is, make no mistake, hard enough. right? The Apollo missions were really risky. Now, the system years of better technology, but still, that's a very dangerous undertaking. And then you talk about the moon to Mars, you get an idea of what you're dealing with here, the order of magnitude difference. So another way to look at this is a view of the moon, of Earth from the moon, taken possibly from Apollo 8 and maybe one of the later missions. Apollo 8 was a famous one. And here is a view of Earth from Mars. This part is Mars. So this was taken by one of the lunar rovers. And anybody see Earth up there? Thank you. So you've probably seen this photograph before. There it is. So imagine the change in psychological outlook when you realize everything and everyone you have known, ever have known, ever will know and do is on that little thing, and it is really far away. I have to start to take these things into account. So this is something that we call in the business progressive Earth independence. We're talking now about the fact that a crew on Mars, around Mars, even on the way to Mars, is going to be almost completely autonomous from Earth. This is new. It doesn't even happen really on lunar missions. So let's start here on the upper left. When astronauts are in low Earth orbit, 200 or so miles, real-time communication with Earth. So mission control is always ready to lend a helping hand. Hopefully, they don't always like that helping hand because it's like Big Brother, but they can always ask for help from mission control. There's almost immediate evacuation capability. If there's an emergency, they get into a waiting Soyuz SpaceX spacecraft, and they can be back on Earth in a matter of hours, maybe days. So for the orbits to line up. And that includes medical emergencies. Has not yet happened, at least on the American side. And there's strong consumables resupply. There's always cargo resupply missions going up, which is really important because those resupply missions have fruits and vegetables, among other things, which they will, except for a few exceptions, they're starting to grow some things on the space station. Generally, they don't get and are really important. Now, we talk about the moon. That's here in the middle, near real-time communication, all right, finite speed of light, you're talking about a second or two, round-trip communication delay, essentially real-time. If there's an emergency, you can depend on call from mission control in Houston. Evacuation capability now starts to get a little dicey, right? Could take several days to come back. And by the way, you need to tolerate, if it's a medical issue, you need to be able to tolerate the G loading of a launch from the moon, which is not as harsh as it is from Earth, but it's still something. So if you're in a spacecraft with a drone or a lot of abdominal and internal use, it's a challenge. And limited consumables resupply because it's so far away. A lot of things will be probably pre-positioned on the moon before we get there. Now, as if that's not all hard enough, the moon mission a Mars mission makes all of that stuff go by child's play. So the moon is what, about 250,000 miles away. Mars is at its closest about 30 million miles away. So we're talking about 100 or 200 times the distance. The mission to Mars will be about 3 years, and that's largely because you have to wait until Earth and Mars are in a proper alignment so that you can get there in about 9 months. So it'll be about 9 months on the way out, 9 months on the way back, and a stay in the vicinity or on the surface of Mars for about 1.5 years. You have to stay there for 1.5 years because you don't have the propulsion capability to come back. You also, by the way, don't have the propulsion capability to change your mind partway on your way to Mars. Now, I don't know what the number is, whether it's a week or a month, but at some point in a Mars mission, in a 3-year Mars mission, when you're launched from Earth with 5, probably gonna be 6 people. Five people who, at least at the start of the mission, are hopefully some of your best friends. 2 of them die because of something that happens on the mission, maybe 2 months in. Well, the rest of you are going for the other 2 years and 10 months of that mission. You literally cannot turn around. So you have to start to take these things into account. Again, the psychological aspects. That's the no, and that's part of no evacuation capability. That includes on the way there. Certainly, because of what I just said, you're not going to be able to leave Mars early, even if there's a medical problem. No real-time communication. Okay. Because of that distance, tens of millions of miles. Worst case, one-way communication, worst case, 2-way round trip communication delay is about 44 minutes, 22 minutes one way. And that is if Earth and Mars are not on opposite sides of the sun, in which case you're not talking to each other at all. So you have an emergency, excuse me, including a medical emergency, when you call back home for help, you better hope that you phrase that question correctly because the answer is coming in 44 minutes. So, you thought it was hard to get your doctor. So that's no evacuation capability, real-time communication, consumables, resupply. You're not going to be sending more stuff out there for the same reasons of the planetary alignment that dictate the human mission. Those also dictate the resupply, the supply missions, not resupply. So a lot of things will be sent early for repositioning and presumably heavily monitored with telemetry to make sure that radiation effects or other things don't decay things like food, medicines, water, whatever it is you might reposition. But also you start doing the math on when you think you might be able to send humans. The proper planetary alignment, the window for a mission of 3 years is not every 26 months. So if you pre-position things, you want to wait to be absolutely positively sure that they're there, which means you have at least another 2 years before you can send a human mission. We have to pre-position everything. So we're not going in the next 4 to 5 years. So that's just one of the aspects of this. Okay. So far I've avoided telling you in great detail about a lot of what's happening to the human body in space, but that's my specialty, and that's what I'm going to get to next. I will say that a lot of the research for mitigating and understanding these issues is carried out on the International Space Station. It's a beautiful laboratory for this. It's not perfect, partly because you can't reproduce, you can't mimic all of the psychological aspects because it's close to home. You can tell the crew whatever you want to try to fool them, but they know in an emergency that they're coming. And you can't turn the radios on and pretend that you're on Mars, send us a postcard, we'll get back to you. Because it's dangerous enough being there. So it's unethical to do some of the things that you would like to do to reproduce some of the Mars situations. I will say that there is a number of Earth-based, what we call analog facilities that reproduce some of these things, including some of the psychological effects. There are facilities, NASA has some of them, where a small number of people go in for months at a time. And so you can manipulate things like sleep schedules and stuff like that. Wintering over in the Antarctic turns out to be a pretty good analog because that's remote, it's isolated, it's truly dangerous. But when the last plane leaves in the fall, you're not coming home until the next plane comes in the spring. So that's truly isolated. You can't really reproduce that in other ways. So astronauts spend a lot of time up there and they do some crazy things because space is full. So we like to have fun while we're up there, but they also do a large number of experiments. So this presumably is someone, cycle ergometer here, heavily instrumented, as you can see, right? Electrodes measuring gas, what goes in, what comes out, oxygen, CO2. So undoubtedly, this astronaut is moving in a project involving the Human Research Program at NASA, because those are the kinds of things that we did. Some of the other ones, these are related to a project that you might have heard from 10 years or so ago called the Twin Study. So NASA sent up a twin, Scott Kelly. His twin brother, a retired astronaut at the time, Mark Kelly, stayed on the ground. That was an opportunity to look at the nature versus nurture in a really kind of sophisticated way, because they were identical twins. So I left NASA I selected those experiments. I was involved in that selection process, but I left NASA before they actually flew the mission. But it was a great foray into some of the really cutting edge science, which is genomics and proteomics and all of that. Those kinds of personalized, more precision medicine approaches. But here is what Scott Kelly is doing in space. So first of all, right here, he's giving himself a flu shot. Are they worried about getting the flu in space? No, they are not. He's giving himself a flu shot. This is part of the Twin Study experiments, because it is a calibrated perturbation to the immune system. We know what's in that shot. We know how normal people respond. We know how his brother responds, because he got the flu shot around the same time and made the same measurements. So that was a nice little experiment. Up here, you see that Scott Kelly, working with Mikhail Koryenko, who was a cosmonaut on what they called at that time the 1-year mission, which happened to coincide with the Twin Study. It was actually a 340-day mission. It's close enough. The 1-year mission, both of those flew for 340 days. And this was not exclusive to this mission or to the Twin Study, but here, Scott Kelly is getting an ultrasound examination of his eyeball. So why is he getting an ultrasound examination of his eyeball? I'm going to get to that in just a minute, because that's one of the more interesting physiological effects, anatomical effects of spaceflight. But also it's notable that they have a space certified ultrasound machine up there. They do not have an X-ray machine. They don't have an MRI. They don't have those kinds of things. They're too heavy. They take up too much energy. But they have an ultrasound machine and they make really good use of it. Now, see, now I gave the punchline away. What I wanted to say was, astronauts, of course, are amazing people, and they do all these experiments and they do wonderful things in space, but they are not supermen. Maybe some of them are. Luca Parmitano, Italian astronaut. I'll just put up this just so you know. So it is true that astronauts are remarkably resilient, extraordinarily fit, healthy. There are some exceptions. There are some interesting exceptions, and that's just starting to be a little bit more forthcoming about these. Now, I think I can say this one fairly in a public setting. NASA has flown an astronaut who had a stroke and recovered. Now, that's kind of new, you know? Why would you do that? Well, it takes a long time and great expense to train an astronaut, just like training a military pilot or someone in special forces, something like that. Once they are trained, you want to keep using them if at all possible. So clearly they did all the appropriate tests to make sure that this person could withstand the rigors of spaceflight. But this also turns out to be very, very important because it ties into commercial spaceflight, which is SpaceX, Blue Origin, Virgin Galactic. Another area that I have experiments that are carried on SpaceX spaceflights and performed by commercial, non-government astronauts. And we learn things that help the NASA people and vice versa. So it's like a whole new world out there. I'm happy to talk about commercial spaceflight. That aspect is fascinating. But I'll wait until the question section, if anybody has any. But this, I want to put this up there to indicate that even though astronauts we think of as being superhuman, they suffer medical problems and issues in space just like we do here on Earth. Some of the more pronounced ones are circle or box in red. Some of them are just typical things that you get from living and working in a high-stress, active environment. But some of them are a little bit unusual. So you see over there on the right-hand side, so skin abrasions, skin rash. For reasons that we don't completely understand, alterations in the immune system, astronauts are prone to getting skin rashes in space. It's okay, it's fixable, it's some cream on, you go about your work. Eye abrasions, okay, if there's no gravity to pull things down to the floor, things get in the eyes. They also get into the lungs if they're not careful. Back pain, a big one, and headaches here. Why is that? Because in the absence of gravity, now I'm going to say the absence of gravity, you're in low Earth orbit, you are subject to the pull of gravity, otherwise you wouldn't stay in orbit. You're using zero gravity, weightlessness, zero lack of gravity in vernacular terms. But in a zero gravity environment, what happens? The spine elongates because gravity is not pulling it down. Fluid, and I'm going to get back to this, body fluids shift up to the head, and because of both of those, headaches and backaches. Also, called insomnia here, that might be oversimplifying it, the sleep problems. The most common medications taken in space, at least when I looked this up most recently, are medications for headache and back pain and for sleep. Early on in missions, they also take some kind of medications for motion sickness. That's one area, space motion sickness. Okay, now let's get into, I'm going to go relatively quickly here. Believe me, I can give an entire lecture on any one of these specific topics. I'm going to talk about a couple of the more critical ones in the following slides. But food and nutrition for 3 years, also pharmaceuticals for three years, right? Look in your pantry, look in your refrigerator, how many things in there have an expiration date that's 3 years or more from today? Not too many. So this has to be fixed. One thing that I heard from person that, if I heard him correctly, person who at the time was the program manager for the International Space Station, so I think he's reliable. He said to develop a new food item for the International Space Station, packaging and make sure it's properly sterilized and bacteria aren't going to grow in it, and it's still palatable and maintains its nutritional content, whatever. Any single item, $1 million. So if you want to take your favorite foods up there, better start saving, or else simplify your diet. But also pharmaceuticals, same idea. Bone mineral loss. We talked about that a little bit, right? Just standing here in a gravity field, I am essentially exercising. I'm fighting gravity. Right? My bones are taking some loading. My heart has to work to maintain blood pressure to my head. That's all. And the muscles are also having to work to keep me upright and move around, fighting this gravity field. If you doubt that, go to bed for a week and see what happens when you try to get out. And as a matter of fact, extended bed rest is one of the analogs that NASA uses for, not just NASA, the space agencies, uses to reproduce some of those physiological effects of spaceflight. And by long duration space bed rest, I mean a typical experiment is like 60 days. Yeah, so that's quite a sacrifice on the part of the subjects. Okay, so one of the things that happens is lose bone mineral density. That means calcium. Okay, you lose calcium from the bones. Where does the calcium go? Well, the calcium goes into the bloodstream and then gets filtered through the kidney and then makes its way into the urine. And then you have a potential problem with kidney stones because you don't want an elevated calcium level in your urine. Now, so far, at least on the American side, we have not seen evidence of increased risk of kidney stones. We think there may have been an early evacuation on the Russian or Soviet side. They're not always as forthcoming with some of their medical information. That's fine. Medical information. There are changes in the immune function, which I said we don't completely understand. Some of them are okay, of no consequence. Some of them are probably not good, but we don't know for sure. It's a very strange one because most of those changes, if not all of them, are what's called subclinical. They don't actually see, like astronauts are not getting more colds in space and fevers and things like that. And notably, when they come back to Earth after being in space for a long period of time, during which there are changes in the immune system, what happens? They are reunited with their families, including in many cases, little kids who have been accumulating germs like crazy for the 6 months that they've been in space. And I have not seen any reports of an increased incidence of communicable diseases after astronauts returning from space. So whatever it is, it's confusing, which doesn't make us feel good. I mean, it makes it, you feel fine that that's good that the astronauts are tolerating those changes, but it doesn't make us feel good because we don't fully understand the changes. Will they exceed a clinical threshold at 1 year and 1 month in space, for which we have no data so far? We don't know. That would be a problem with the 3-year Mars mission. And then there is another thing very interesting called viral shedding, which means a reactivation, again, subclinical, the reactivation of latent viruses that sometimes are just in the body, the virtue of having been exposed to some virus earlier. So herpes virus is one of them, and there are a few others. Changes in the, sorry, I'm just going through this like a lightning round. There's a lot to say about all of these. There are changes in the gut microbiome, right? All those organisms, microorganisms that live inside your intestines, there are more of them than there are cells of your own body. So you're outnumbered by a bunch of things that are living inside of you that are not really part of you. They do not share your DNA. Yet they are critically important. They're critically important for what you expect, metabolism and digestion. But it turns out that they also have a role in a bunch of other things, like generation of, they talk to the, through hormones, they talk to the parts of the brain and nervous system that generate neurotransmitters, which have a lot to do with higher cognitive functions. So there is something called the gut-brain axis. That's very important. This is starting to become more, people are becoming more aware of this even on Earth. So one of the considerations here is we do know that there are changes in the microbiome when people go into space. Again, so far they don't seem to be that bad. We know that over long periods of time in space, the microbiomes of the various crew members start to become more alike, which makes sense because they're exposed to the same environmental contaminants, microorganisms. But it's bad because you're losing a diversity of microorganisms. And diversity in biology turns out to be a really good thing because when some unexpected bacterium or germ comes along, it may be that one microorganism that one of the crew members has that is going to save the day. And you want that to be communicated to the other crew members. Here on Earth, we're exposed to this normal turnover of environmental perturbations just by walking around, just by breathing the same air inside you, just by going outside. And that's healthy. And you don't have that in space. I'm going to skip sleep partly because I talked about it now. Here's a really interesting one. I alluded to this a few times, various ways. When you go into space, people go into space, there is a shift of fluids from the lower body to the upper body. Blood, lymphatic fluid, cerebrospinal fluid that surrounds the brain and spinal cord. We've known about this for almost just about as long as people have gone into space. So astronauts report that they will have sinus congestion. You see that they will sometimes have puffy faces. So this is Story Musgrave. We heard about him earlier. He was some of the Hubble servicing missions. There he is on the ground on the left and in space on the right. You see his face kind of puffy. This is why, by the way, astronauts like spicy foods and Tabasco sauce a lot when they go into space, because the puffiness, nasal congestion, blunts their sense of taste. So another thing, just one more thing to be thinking about. So again, we've known that for a long time, but what we've just, I'll say recently, now we've known this probably for 15 years, but we don't really have a good handle on it. One of the consequences of this seems to be an impact on the shape of the eye and therefore the optical properties and visual acuity. So this was first found out when astronauts started coming back from some of the early flights to the International Space Station, reporting that they couldn't see their checklists. Hold your checklist down here. Okay, well, they're 3 to 6 months older than they were when they started the mission, and you get to that certain age, and things start to deteriorate. But still, there seemed to be more than that. So finally, when enough people talked about it, and we started to investigate it seriously, they started to see some real serious issues in not all, but some of the astronauts, including changes in the retinal structure. So I won't go into detail, but my recti, scotomas, choroidal folds, ripples, like corrugations in the retina. But here's the one that I think is most notable and probably easiest to understand. Flow flattening. By here we mean the optical, the eyeball. And you can see an MRI image here enhanced with this line. This is normal on the left, and this is after coming back from space, not in space, because you don't have the MRI. And then you can see that it looks like you've taken a beach ball and pressed on the back of it. It's deformed. That changes the optical axis of the eye, changes the optical properties of his vision. Now, why is that happening? Well, here's the best hypothesis we have so far, is that the fluid shifts up toward the head, increased blood, the cerebrospinal fluid, all this stuff inside the skull. All right. The skull is pretty hard. There's not too many places where that fluid can go. So watch one of the relief valves for that fluid that works its way down the optic nerve. The optic nerve connecting my brain to my eye. My eye is outside the skull. So works its way down the sheath of the optic nerve, the covering of the optic nerve, that's what this represents, and pushes on the back of the eye, changes optical properties. Now, you don't have to know a lot about the eye. You don't have to know a lot about astronauts. You don't have to know a lot about vision to understand that if you're talking about changing the visual acuity of high-performing individuals in a dangerous environment, you can bet that that gets a lot of attention. And it is getting a lot of attention. There's a lot of research going on. There are some other related issues too that seem to incorporate changes that we might be seeing in brain structure. Most of them, if not all so far, have been reversible. But what happens if you're exposed to this for 3 years on a Mars mission? Well, let's be optimistic. Let's say that being on the surface of Mars in a 0.38 G environment is sufficient to halt some of these, to start pulling the blood and other fluids down. Well, that would be really good, but we have no idea if that's the case because we haven't sent Mars. And you can't do the experiment unless you have a human centrifuge in space, which we don't have. Okay, so this is one of the real serious ones that has a lot of attention, because if this is just the tip of the iceberg, the fact that you're causing changes in eye structure, including retinal structure, are you going to, on a longer term basis, see actual changes to neural structure? That would be really bad. Okay, here's an interesting one. I didn't think about this very much during a lot of my professional career doing spaceflight research of my own, because I was doing physiology and hardcore neuroanatomy, neurobiology, and stuff. But it turns out not surprisingly, maybe, that the psychological effects of spaceflight might be, you're looking for a showstopper, it could be either radiation, which is a big question mark, or psychological issues, mood, motivation, depression, interpersonal conflicts. So, let's explain this a little bit. This is one of my favorite projects from NASA around the time that I was there. You can go online and find the report that I'm referring to here. Jack Stuster, 2014. This was a project called the Journals Project. Great name, because that's exactly what it is. Those astronauts who agreed to be test subjects for this filled out a journal during their 3 to 6 months on the space station, or whatever it is that they wanted to talk about, write about. This text was downloaded to a very secure server, and Jack Stuster's research team looked for keywords in there. Like, what's going on with you guys? What is it that you're talking about? What's on your minds? Well, he looked at things. You can see this one here on the left. Ryan says journal entries on conflicts. How many times are astronauts saying, yeah, you know, we almost got into a fight. Mission control really pushed me to the limits here. Something like that, something that's really not there. And he mapped it by quarter. So if you have a 6-month mission, you divide that into 4 parts. So a 3-month mission, you do the same. So it's normalized by the length of the mission. And you can see that this initially goes down and then starts going up. And that is not a very promising trend. I'll skip the one on the right, but it's basically the same idea. The reason that I mentioned this is because you always try to relate these spaceflight effects to something that we understand on Earth. Because then we say, well, yeah, okay, we get that. We've seen that before. Not only that, we know how to study. We'll just do more of these Earth-based experiments. There's something called the third quarter effect in the psychological literature. The third quarter effect is appropriate to a huge number of things, as it turns out, that are somewhat unusual or slightly stressful, or a little bit slightly stressful, as long as you know how long they're going to last. So the third quarter effect is being a junior in college, right? The first year, certainly, it's exciting, right? You're making new friends, you're doing all sorts of interesting stuff, maybe even the second year. You get to that junior year, you're not a senior, you don't see the light at the end of the tunnel, you just want to get the hell out of it, right? It's what you're probably experiencing right about now, although we're well past the quarter of my thought. But 15 minutes ago, maybe you just said, you know, I thought for the first half hour this was going to be interesting. Now I just want to leave. Please finish. And now that we're about an hour in, you see we're in the fourth quarter, so you might be rejuvenated. But it's that third quarter that, under a lot of circumstances, Antarctic winter rovers, a number of things, that's where the maximum amount of badness happens. That's where they lose their motivation. It's just not fun. But that's not what we're seeing. We're seeing that something seems to continue to get worse over time, even into the fourth quarter. Is that a self-limiting process? Is it going to stop? Is that as bad as it gets? We don't know, but we don't understand it. And that's the problem. And if you think this is not going to be an issue, the example I give sometimes, so this room is probably a lot larger than a Martian spacecraft will be, but let's say a room this big, right? Look around, find 5 people here who you really like. Everybody else leaves, you close the doors, nobody gets in or out for 3 years. Right. That's the interpersonal relationship issue. Same thing, same idea here, not a different way, but you get the idea. This was provided to me a number of years ago by Dave Davis, just retired recently, or in the process of retiring, the University of Pennsylvania. But he basically asked astronauts on a visual analog scale, that's what VAS is. Just imagine a scale from 0 to 100. Tell me on that scale, what is your current stress level? And it was a pretty crude experiment. It's like preliminary data. Whatever you mean by stress, however you want to normalize it, whatever number you want to report, just give it to me. And up to 180 days, which is what we were doing at the time, a 6-month mission, you can see that this is not promising. And Dave, of course, was astute enough to fit a mathematical function to that, which extrapolates this out and shows that by the time you get to a 1-year mission, where people's heads are exploding because of the stress. In fact, people's heads do not explode because of the stress when they're in space. So what is it that's going on? We don't know, but we don't completely understand.
How about just cabin fever?
Well, that's exactly, that's kind of what it's capturing. Probably one aspect of what it's capturing. Cabin fever, the fact that your crewmate didn't bother you at first, but if I have to have another dinner with him chewing with his mouth open and kill him, I miss my pets, whatever it might be, right? This captures a whole bunch of stuff.
It's sort of ironic that the novelty will wear off after a while. So is anything done to kind of perpetuate that sort of?
That's a great question. Let me come back to that question, because what I want to do is try to remind me if I do not, there's something to say about that. But I want to wrap up and just get a couple, because I'm over time. I know I want to wrap up the ordinance part of what I'll say, which is that NASA has, I want to pick on NASA here because they contribute to my world, including my wife's and my research. But NASA has a very rigorous approach to addressing these problems of human health and performance in long-duration spaceflight. This is the graph with modifications, but this is the chart that essentially ran my life for the 3 years that I worked at NASA. It is called the Integrated Path for Risk Reduction, ERR. But what it is a timeline. And you can see that this goes back in years, so there's 2019, but it is a timeline out to the expected lifetime of the International Space Station out there. Let's go past that actually. It's 2030 now. And it takes the main risks, the highest priority risks to health and performance. By the way, there's a very involved, very rigorous, often very contentious process by which NASA prioritizes those risks. It's actually kind of fascinating how you try to take something as messy as physiological system like the body and try to approach it from really almost an engineering risk management point of view. But NASA is an engineering and operational culture. So you need this to express the messiness of human behavior and performance and health to that audience. But it has its uses. So you start up here, radiation exposure, cancer, cardiovascular, you go down cognitive or behavioral conditions, number 3, as of the time of this chart. And it's a timeline. The idea is that you take the things that are currently high risk for which there is no known countermeasure, and those things are rated red, and you want to turn those into things that have low risk, are mitigated, have a countermeasure, or even if they occur, it's just not that big a deal. So those are the green things. And in between those, that's where research is going on, is the yellow. Now, this is great, like I said, to convey the complexity of what is trying to be done and to show people who are providing funding for the research program at NASA, they're not trying to address every conceivable problem. Dental issues, hearing issues. There's other ways to address things. We don't need to do research on those. But those are the things that we think are, these are the ways to try to show showstoppers. Now, what's the problem with this presentation? Well, from my point of view, and this is my major point and a major part of what I do professionally now. This implies that all of these things are independent of each other. So sometimes these are called swim lanes, stovepipes, silos. We all have different terms for these things. This is not a NASA unique problem by any means, right? National Institutes of Health are separated into various institutes and centers, largely on a disease-based model. So that you can pretend that if you have cardiovascular disease, well, maybe you don't have diabetes because they're investigated by different groups. Not the reality of the situation at all. And these things will interact with each other. So not only will they interact, but this also has the disadvantage of only representing issues that have already been seen. So we know that there's bone loss, demineralization. We know that there's muscle atrophy. We know from spaceflight and similar circumstances that there will be cognitive and behavioral issues. So it's easy to justify doing research on these within NASA because we have evidence for them. Otherwise, you have what a lot of people in an operational setting think is the crazy guy in the white lab coat who just wants to get research money to follow his or her pet project. And that doesn't go over well in an operational setting. NASA is not NIH. They do not have the resources to pursue things that might be low risk or low likelihood. So this is kind of a necessary evil. But what happens in a case when you're doing all your research and you're developing countermeasures and mitigating the known problems? What's going to kill you? The problem that you haven't seen yet until you're on your way to Mars. Now, let me just give you one example. This is the most recent one. There's a history of these. This happened just about 3 or 4 years ago. An astronaut on the International Space Station developed an episode of deep vein thrombosis, a blood clot in the jugular vein. That's not a good thing to happen. That's a potentially fatal situation. So fortunately, this was on the International Space Station. They could call for a lot of help. They could fast track some medications to get it. It was not a medical report. They figured it probably be better to try to treat this person in space. Let's see how it goes. So 60 some years of human spaceflight experience, and you see this for the first time. It's not fair. Right? It's not fair that the body would come up with these additional ways to screw up your life when all you're trying to do is get to Mars. But I can almost guarantee you that something similarly unexpected will happen on the Mars mission. And because of this approach, you might not be able to deal with it. You will have mitigated the known problems, but not set up a structure that's resilient enough to deal with unknown problems. One last point about this. This was found during an ultrasound exam, doctoral ultrasound, within that workflow and out of the head. This ultrasound examination was done during a research study, not a regular medical examination. If this subject had not agreed to do that research study, he or she could have been dead by now, because this would not have been found. So we dodged a bullet. Okay, so here's the way that I think this needs to be addressed. This is from the World Health Organization. Health is a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being, not just the absence of disease or infirmity. I would say in a spaceflight setting, health, well-being, and high performance is more than just mitigating known risks. It's mitigating them, but providing the tools, tangible and intangible, so that crews can deal with the unexpected. And that includes interactions between systems and a number of other things. But that's where I'm going to stop. That's another talk to talk about, say, well, what does that actually mean? How do you accommodate the unexpected? How do you anticipate things that have never happened before? Well, I don't really have an answer to that, but that's what a lot of my research is trying to address. But among others, you could say that, well, one of the things you might want to do is make sure that you maintain not only the physical and medical well-being, but in your question, and the doctor did, the psychological well-being of astronauts. So what would you do to, among other things, make sure that they're staying in a good state of mind? Yes, hard to believe that anyone would find being in space tedious or boring. read some of the, not so much the mission reports, but biographies and autobiographies from some of the Apollo astronauts. So Apollo moon missions takes about 4 days or so, 3 or 4 days to get to the moon, from Earth. It takes about 3 days to get back. And some of the astronauts were complaining about fatigue of coming back to Earth after landing on the moon. 3 days. Now, I get it. It's a pretty exciting if you've just walked on the moon and you're already starting to think like, what am I going to do with the rest of my life? That's all true. We've had a big issue with that. Depression. But still, if they're, these are high performing individuals, right? They're not used to just sitting around or floating around. So if they're expressing some desire to just like get this mission over with after coming back, just on their way back from the moon to the Earth, imagine what the Mars explorers are going to be like coming back, taking 9 months. Not so much the first ones, because they're the first ones, but what about the second crew? They don't even have the parades to look forward to necessarily. So what do you do to accommodate that, to help keep them busy, help keep them engaged, help keep them psychologically healthy? We don't know yet. So that's why that's one of the higher risks, cognitive and behavioral things. There's a lot of ideas. One of them is, maybe not surprisingly, virtual reality. Right? You go in the corner, you put your VR headset on, and you explore virtually whatever it is that makes you happy. Now, is that going to backfire? No. Right? If I'm 6 months into a 3-year mission, do I want to put this thing on and see all the happy memories that I left behind? So you need to be able to make sure you can tailor that, the changes that occurred during the mission. I'll say one other thing in your question. The thing that I did not talk about here, which is a very popular idea, and I think rightfully so, is artificial gravity. I've circumvented one question. I'm sure somebody will ask me about that. So artificial gravity, how do you do it? Well, there's 2 ways to do artificial gravity on a spacecraft. One of them is to accelerate at a very high, well, by the time you have accelerated for a period of weeks or months, you're going really, really fast, using a lot of fuel. But if you continue to accelerate linearly on your way out, you're essentially applying gravity field, right? If you accelerate this way, the astronauts are effectively being pulled down to the floor this way. That ain't gonna happen. Right, nobody will seriously proposing that if the closing requirement are too much. So what do? You spin the spacecraft. It's centrifugal force, centrifugal acceleration. It's called centrifugal force. And if you're on the outer rim, then you have essentially gravity force. You're also in a spinning environment, and that could be a little tricky. That has some vestibular consequences. If you don't believe that, go out, find yourself a bar stool, close your eyes, have somebody spin you around, and that bar stool stop you all of a sudden, and then try to stand. So there are some implications of doing in a spinning environment. Artificial gravity is really great for the gravity-related issues, right? Bone, muscle, cardiovascular, probably the fluid shift issue, the fluids down to the lower part of the body. We're used to having them. 2 issues. One of them, we have no idea, and I mean zero, absolutely no idea how much artificial gravity is necessary to halt these processes. Is it 0.1 G for an hour a day? Or is it 0.9 G for 20 hours a day? We don't know. No idea. There is an animal centrifuge on the space station right now, like from the Japanese space agency, and they can do rodent experiments to start to look at these things. But rodents don't have the same body structure as us, the long bones that are fighting gravity like ours. So there's some limitations there. The second reason, the reason I give for not being such a fan of artificial gravity is, I think, related to your question. You get on a Mars mission, you're in space for a long period of time, it's very demanding, right? Small number of people, isolated, something bad happens, you can't turn around and come back home. Okay, you're in space, you're going to Mars. You've made the calculation, it's worth it. and they can be pretty brutal. And now you're gonna turn on the artificial gravity and take away the one thing that makes being in space fun, which is floating around in a zero gravity environment, right? So for my mind, I'm thinking, let's give them a break, right? Let's let them float around. That's a constant reminder that they are doing something unusual, something very rare, something that not everybody has to do. Now, maybe you can combine those by once being part of the space station. Those are things, but suffice it to say, people are thinking about it, like you said, we don't have a good answer for it, though. We don't know about astronauts. Another complication, so you're wrong. One other complication of this is that astronauts also tend to be, say, reticent about reporting all of these kinds of issues. That's changing. There's a lot of astronauts now are physicians, engineers, scientists. They realize the importance of what they're doing for the next generation of scientists. Whereas many times in the early days, if you read the right stuff or see the movie, there's this natural animosity between flight surgeons and astronauts. Even though flight surgeons should be there to be your friend, there's always the risk that if you report something bad to your doctor, that's going to get around and you're just going to say, well, we have options. We don't really need to fly the person who's reporting X, Y, or Z, even if X, Y, or Z is insignificant. But like I said, that's changing, but still the idea is, and you see this on the research side because medical data is not research data. So researchers don't always get to see things that the medical people see. So that impairs the ability to address some of these things.
Similar vein, do you work with the military at all on some of these issues? There's a lot of, it's not quite the, you're not quite as isolated, but you know, you got the war as hell, but actually it's not, it's not as experience. And then you got similar personality, and they do a lot of physiological research on things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. I haven't done a lot of Navy project that's related with some of this. I have to say that my experience has been so far that there's more talk about that interaction or that.
I know they do a lot of research.
But I mean, you identify, of course, they do a lot of research on that. These are high-performing individuals, very stressful environments. You could make the case that special forces, spec ops, is probably possibly the closest, because that's like a few moments of terror and otherwise dangerous, but somewhat nominal situation. People have mentioned submarines. That one comes around a lot. I was there for 3 years. I still don't understand why submarine as an analog is not widely used. The CO2 level on submarines is high. The CO2 level on a space station is high. In that aspect, it's pretty good. Because of course, there's a lot more people in submarine, like that kind of social isolation. So the dynamics are good. And submariners are a lot younger on average. So there are some differences, but if I had to guess, it might be because there are national security interests involved, leading to maybe not really a willingness to share information.
Why I spent a lot of years in SoCon, so and they do have a lot of they have dedicated units that study them, and it's not going to be classified.
Okay.
It might be a cultural.
People approach me once in a while. Say, you want to go on a submarine?
Submarines a little different, those are notes. So
Well,
yeah, like this the SOCOM special operations, they're pretty open about it as far as the research. And we think we publish a lot of it.
I have seen publications and I've been surprised what they're willing to publish in the open scientific literature.
We have a question in the chat.
Yes.
What happens when one astronaut murders another astronaut on their mission to Mars, Perhaps they wouldn't stop eating with their mouth open. Will there be a jail? The rest of us would not want to be hanging around with a murderer. We might be next. That's the real question. I read it. Thanks, Dan.
Um, We'll try to address this seriously, because I believe it's a serious question. It is a potentially serious question. Let's start with what we know. There have been reports of some troubling psychological behaviors on the part of some astronauts over time. Not enough that there had been an evacuation and a mission aboard, but there's a famous one. Now, in all of these things, you have to wonder, to what extent is the information integrated in the third hand, fourth hand? There's a report from one of the shuttle flights, so this would go back to 30 years, maybe, or something like that. The flight had a mission payload specialist. Payload specialists are non-professional astronauts, right? They were selected by a national space agency, but not named the nation, and there's a particular place, but this is public information, it's easy to find. To fly on the shuttle, to perform a specific experiment. It might be a commercial experiment. Charlie Walker, who I know, had flown, I think, for McDonnell Douglas or another aerospace company 4 or 5 times as a payload specialist, as a non-professional astronaut through a number of times for commercial R&D in the 80s and 90s. So the payload specialist program was vibrant and successful. Anyway, payload specialist doing an experiment that essentially failed dramatically, like the equipment broke down. And this payload specialist reportedly got into such a depressed state that the crew was literally concerned about their safety, that they worried that this guy was going to try to open the door and leave it. And so, again, depending on who you listen to and how you hear a lot of anecdotes and rumors in this business. Shortly after that mission, the crew commander started taking padlocks and putting them on the shuttle main hatch. And there's no reason to open it in space anyway. It's like opening the door on an emergency exit on an aircraft. Doesn't make any sense if you're in the air. Doesn't make any sense if you're in space. So you can do that safely. It says you don't want somebody to be tempted. If you look at the standard operating procedures, whatever NASA calls them, for dealing with a psychological disturbance in space, there are these procedures. They are published, and will be available. Might have to poke around a little bit. They basically say, put this person in a sleeping bag and use all the duct tape necessary to just keep them.
Wow.
So it's been thought of.
Duct tape jail.
Duct tape jail. You duct tape them to the wall. Just get them out of the way. Probably medicate them. So that wasn't meant to be my answer to that question, but that probably would be the answer. Just you're not going to kill the person. It does call into some interesting questions. If it's an international crew, what nation? So it's like the law of the sea to some extent. What nation's laws prevent?
You didn't mention radiation exposure.
No, I didn't. Is that the question?
Long-term effects, short-term effects.
Okay, so radiation confuses that all. And I've talked to people who are radiation researchers, and it is either the single most critical and showstopper, a large problem that's going to stop us from going to Mars, or it's of no significance at all. And I get both stories from people who are professional spaceflight biology researchers. So on the one hand, we don't have a really good evidence base. So for humans in the radiation environment in low Earth orbit space station is worse than it is here on Earth, but nowhere near what it is in deep space. between here and the moon, and clearly between here and Mars. We know what that environment is like. This spacecraft gone through it. We measured it. But we don't have evidence from human exposure other than the Apollo program, and those were 12 days. Was the longest, Apollo 17. So we don't have a lot of good evidence. The radiation exposures that people do get on Earth, atomic bomb survivors, people think like that, medical radiation, radiation therapy for cancers and things like that. It's a different type of radiation. NASA does, and NASA and other organizations does radiation research on plants, animals, cells. There's a facility called the National Space Radiation Laboratory. It's Brookhaven, Long Island. They have a beam. The beam simulate radiation of various kinds. Galactic cosmic radiation would be the big one because those contain heavy ions. So you imagine an iron nucleus going through your body, it's going to do some damage. And then there's other lighter elements too, nuclei. And then there's protons, solar radiation. But the situation in space is relatively low level chronic stimulation, whereas the only way you can feasibly conduct an experiment at the NASA Space Radiation Laboratory is to have a higher dose rate over a shorter period of time, which may not generalize at all to the real response in true biological systems, because you've swamped the repair mechanisms. There are natural mechanisms that cells have to repair DNA damage. But if you're getting this really high level for a short period of time, they may not function. So that's the bad news. Now, the good news is that when you get to a planetary surface, like Mars, radiation from half of the sky is blocked out automatically. And the other thing is you can tunnel in, presumably like we would go to habitat and provide more. So, but you need the tools to do that. So I don't like to talk about radiation because, like I said, it's so confusing. And then there are differences between dose rates and doses and the biological equivalent dose, which is the actual damage that's done, which is related to the linear energy transfer, the amount of energy that is dissipated by the thing that's traversing the body. And you get into these weird situations in which providing radiation shielding on a spacecraft from some forms of radiation makes the problem worse, because particle hits the outside of the spacecraft, spallation. It knocks free slower moving particles on the inside of the spacecraft, slower moving, so they spend more time in your body depositing energy. But you can't win this situation. And the most effective shielding that you really need from all of these things is to have what probably will be used. It turns out that hydrocarbons are pretty good shielding for some forms of radiation. So you take a part, it's called storm shelter. You take a part of the spacecraft that's big enough to take the entire crew, store water around the circumference of it. And that's where you go if you have sufficient advanced warning of something like a solar flare, coronal mass injection, which of course we don't have sufficient warning of. That's another problem.
And let me ask a follow-up for a meta question. Has anyone looked at the rate at which you solve potential problems versus the rate at which you are discovering potential problems for 3 years?
That's really interesting. A meta-scientific question. I would say systematically, no. Probably the closest would be in some of the publications that I have impressed, because I used the deep-range thrombosis example and some other one, space motion sickness. We did not see space motion sickness until the Apollo program. We didn't see it in Mercury and Gemini, and there were reasons for that, I think we understand. But it's, again, it's one of those things that, like, okay, looks like we're not gonna have relationship astronauts until we do. And it turns out like half of them are sick. So there's a string of those kinds of things. How many of them are there? Does it outweigh the problems that we're solving? I don't know. That would make it interesting.
Well, would depend on the types of problems. The engineering problems are probably a lot easier than the
Absolutely. That's right. Yeah. And it would, I mean, there's a huge number of footnotes here, but it would depend on, like, we really think that we're capturing the problem, because there may be some things going on with medical privacy needs that the research community doesn't get to know about those. And especially on what's called the behavioral development performance, psychological, interpersonal relationship aspects. Getting better, but to a large extent, those groups don't share information as much as they probably should.
Can you say again what you said earlier about the medical research that was done vis-a-vis rodents?
Well, I mentioned it in terms of radiation, in terms of, well, I mentioned it two times, radiation and artificial gravity.
Okay,
So rodents are popular. NASA does not do a lot of animal research. They do a lot of cells, cultures, things like that. But something called tissues on a chip and organs on a chip are now very popular. You can have a chip that has the right nutrients and the right fluid circulating on it, and actually grow cardiac cells on it. Then beat like a real heart. And then you can subject that to various rigors. There's a guy, a colleague of mine, Johns Hopkins, who does this. But in terms of actual research being done on rodents, artificial gravity and related issues, because the centrifuge that they have on the space station is only big enough for rodents. They planned for decades to have a human-rated centrifuge on the space station, but it never happened. And radiation, I can't guarantee that radiation is tested on rodents. I don't know. We'd have to check that. But certainly much even smaller animals than that. They do. But you pick the lowest level organism that you think can give you generalizable results. That's the general rule. But of course, you don't know how well they generalize.
I really enjoyed how when you started the talk, you talked about, so it really pays to have a human on board because of the total flexibility. And I've listened very carefully to everything you said. I mean, I'm coming to the conclusion, my own personal conclusion, that by the time we're ready to actually do this, that AI research will reach a point where we'll have quote unquote super smart robots who will be able to reprogram to an infinite number of operations, and then all of a sudden all these psychological and physical humanoid weakness related issues will go away, and we'll be going into deep space with robots. And that's my prediction. Aside from the hubris of putting a human on Mars,
Right.
And into deep space.
So you didn't phrase that in the form of a question, but nevertheless. One thing I'll say about that is, first of all, we don't send humans into space only to do science and operations. Like, there are other reasons, national pride, motivation, all that kind of stuff. So, and given that it's a national program, those things are legitimate concerns. Now, if you want to talk purely about science and operations, keeping the mission resilient, I'd say you make a strong point. But I'm not completely convinced of that, and here's why. a really good AI model based on machine learning, they require huge amounts of data, enormous amounts of data to do adequate learning. We have 64 years experience of people in space, and that's fewer than 700 people. And not all of them have been subjects for biomedical experiments by a long shot. In other words, if you're going to try to apply machine learning and artificial intelligence to effects of space flight on humans, you're going to be extrapolating to a dangerous extent. That's what I would say. We don't have the data set. And of course, we will accumulate the data set, obviously. But I think it's going to take longer than we might otherwise think to get a really good data set. Contrary to what people might think, we do not, every time we send a person into space, measure everything that we can possibly measure on that person by a medical aid for the entire mission. So there are huge holes in the data.
Just follow on from that. How about we put the human space, but for psychological issues, put an AI that is human entered for psychological issues.
I like that idea, and people have talked about it. I'm not sure if anybody was yet researching it. I wouldn't be surprised if somebody.
I mean, if you go on Facebook right now, they have AI and they talk to them and they.
Yeah, especially if it can, if you will, learn over the course of the mission. Because the other thing that's kind of pernicious about that, you can almost guarantee that my psychological needs and desires are going to be different after 3 years of the Mars mission than they were at the beginning. Good, bad, more needs, less need, whatever it might be. But there'll be different. So you want that system to be learning along the way. But you can do that by paying attention to what the rest of the group needs. And that's what. So I think you're onto something there. And you could measure, if you really want to do this correctly, you could measure the physiological stress response, heart rate variability, cortisol, a number of other things to say. Did that interaction with the AI surrogate actually make things worse? Or did it actually?
And certainly if you're siloing because of a long mission, then, oh, I can't stand this guy, can choose. The AI may be able to meter it to integrate and then fences.
Absolutely. That's very much the idea of high school. That's very much the idea of, we talked about on the commercial space flight side, because there's a group human research program for civilians in space. We don't remember, we just started to talk about these things, and we take great pains right at the beginning to say, unlike the NASA case, it's not the job of agency of NASA to tell things that can't fly. Certainly on the commercial side, it's not going to be the case with people like me to say who can and cannot fly. It's to say you were selected by NASA or you have $100 million. In reality, you are going to fly. It's my job to make sure that you do it in the best possible. And you don't risk the hell of the rest of the.
I think Kurt has something for you.
Yeah. And it doesn't really matter because we're all in the matrix anyway, so.
Blue pill or green pill?
Or things, got a patch in there for you.
Oh, very good. Thank you, Mike.
I won't thank Mark for his time tonight. He'll be around after the break for additional questions, arm twisting, see if we can get you on the next list, whatever you want to do.
You
Okay.
can probably tell that I can talk about this all night, and I'm happy to do stuff.
Oh, yes, that's,
I'm good.
we're all the same way. All right, going to take a short break,
Yes.
10 minutes or so, 15, 5, somewhere like that. And the lights blink, it'll be time to come back indoors.
We'll take a 15-minute break and I'm gonna pause the recording. Okay. We are back. And let's see, lots of accolades in the chat box. So We're going,
Kirk's doing something here.
yes, Kurt's doing something very important.
All right. I will introduce the next speaker. Hi, it's Kirk. Kirk's got something important to tell you about.
Very important.
Well, I have some certificates here to hand out. These are from the Astronomical League, which, by the way, in case you didn't know, we're all members of, by way of being a member of the club. We're also a member of the Astronomical League, which is a federation, American Federation of Astronomy Clubs. And for years, they've had these observe programs, give you stuff to look at with your telescopes, and when they hand out pins and certificates for them. Well, they branched out. Now they have awards for club outreach. So that's what these are tonight. These are outreach awards. And there's 3 levels. The basic, you need to have, I don't have it memorized, but you need to have attended so many public events, and I think you need 10 hours of volunteer work. That's for the outreach level.
And 5 events.
And 5 events. And then there's a stellar level, which is how many events? 4.
Another 50 hours.
Yeah, I guess it's, I don't know if it's 50 more hours. It doesn't mean 50 total, means you get 10 already, now you get 50 more, you need 60. And then the final one, there's a master level, you need 100 more hours, so it's 160 total. So the first one I want to give out, this is for the master level, and this one goes to Al, who is our planetarium director. Hey! Haven't pulled it off, but. Uh-oh, he's a tour. There's your pin.
Oh, okay, it's the hand with the stars,
Yeah.
but it's got something more, right?
The comet across the top
Oh,
for the master
that's
level.
what it looks like.
So, congratulations.
Well,
Congratulations.
All right.
Oh, I should, I forgot to mention, and I'll do it so quickly, that, and. Yes. Hey, well, don't wreck. You want to? We only got it. It's gonna be. No, no. You want another one here? We'll try this. I think it ran out of ink. Yeah. I'll try not to get ink all over. Drop that one. Well, so what I was gonna say is, we track the hours. Easy way to track the hours, thanks, is by the Night Sky Network, which we use. That's that's what our calendar of events is based on. And when you volunteer, you can go in there and you can add your hours. And then what Lori did was she went and she made a spreadsheet. She made spreadsheets for each person with their hours and the events they went to, and it totals everything all up, and you can just submit that. So, but then she said, okay, here's their certificate, or here's their spreadsheet. Give it to them and let them maintain it themselves from now on, because she's not gonna keep doing it.
That's right.
So what I was gonna suggest is, everybody who gets a certificate, I would like to get your email addresses so I can send those to you. So you have to go in. We still got time. So the next one, Jim Reynolds, I don't believe is here tonight. So I'll try to do this as quickly and as respectfully as possible. Thanks. Let's just got some more pins here. No shortage on pins. Okay, first of all, Mr. Chris Bennett, please. He achieved the outreach level and the stellar level, which is at least 60 hours. I saw Brooke earlier. Did she sneak over? Is she still around?
She had her family member with her, but
Oh, yeah. Okay. We'll catch up with her later. Is Eric Smallwood here?
no,
We've got one.
nope,
No Eric. I don't see Jeff Silver.
nope,
Is Marissa Galitz?
yes.
All right. Yay. We have achieved the outreach level. Congratulations. And this Hubble engineer, you know.
Nope,
Put that up on the wall. We're in the Michael Newman.
nope, he was online.
Faster than I thought. And Narian, not here.
No.
Rob Williams,
Nope,
Dan Patton.
nope,
Gets two. Okay, Victoria Barr.
nope,
Oh, and that's it. Oh, that's it.
no.
Catch up with them all later. Wow.
Wasn't there one more?
Who you thinking?
Was there one for Shannon?
There, no, I think that's coming later. I didn't get one.
You probably didn't know about it.
Yeah, somebody's come for
Yeah.
nothing.
If you weren't master level, I just kind of handed them off to Kurt to take care of. So you have one coming. No, but all the hours that you did for Eclipse Ambassador
Yeah.
got entered into Night Sky Network and put into the spreadsheet, and that's what, so you have to come back. I just assumed he had yours since I was
Yeah.
seeing you.
Yeah, they kind of come in batches.
That's how they do. The more you've already got yours.
Oh, yeah, I got mine long ago. Yeah, after you get your doctorate, he's a doctoral candidate.
Okay.
So that's yours? Okay.
That's it.
Did you have something?
This pen is whatever you want.
Yep, I got it.
All right, so those are all outreach pens.
me
There
do
are
it
several of them
here.
already that have some of those. Lori and I specifically have them. They're numbered, I don't remember what number they are, but,
They're smaller numbers than, whoops, than they,
oh, look, it's repeating after I said whoops. I didn't say whoops. Now I said whoops. Did you get it?
all right, enough of that, Mr. Skip.
All right, so outreach coming up here in May. What's today, 14th? All right, we have Soldiers for Life. Mikey, you here? Help? No, Mike's not here. Guys, more welcome to come out and help him. He has a good time out there and right next to the Ravens training facility, so you might be able to wander over there and look through the gate and go, oh yeah, okay.
Quick note from Marissa, there is a youth member, Noah, who may be coming out and connecting to help. And he's looking for signatures for volunteer hours for school
The Soldiers for Life.
at any of the events. And since he lives closest to Soldiers Delight, he may be coming there.
Saturday.
Yeah, that's what we told them.
Okay, all right, and then the following weekend is Hopkins Creek Astronomy out there in Frederick. We are still looking for somebody who lives out that way, or would somebody like to take that one over? Okay, it's real easy, we got y'all set up, everything's there, just gotta come out there, bring a telescope if it's clear, or if it's not, and just smile, look pretty.
Where is it?
Hopkins Creek Nature Center,
Close to Middletown?
yeah, it's still Frederick County, but it's close to Middletown. From here, from my house, it's about half an hour.
Other side of Frederick.
Yes,
Yeah, the other side of Frederick, yeah.
it's about a half hour
It's
from
also
Mount
actually
Airy.
a really dark spot too. It's out in the middle of a bunch of farmland, so it's got a pretty good dark area. And both the naturalists there are well versed in everything and are willing to help and pull up and help you with do anything you need to have done. All right, now let's jump to June. Now, starting in June, Notice today start to be a little bit fuller. We have a lot more programs going on, June, July, and August. We're coming into our summer months, so please, if you can volunteer, please volunteer. And if you can't volunteer, well, then we're gonna reinstitute the draft. Because I am still the president. Sorry, got me in trouble last time. Alright, so basically, we got the first Saturday of the month, we got, Milk House. Milk House in Cunningham Falls. Alright. Rain or shine program, well, no, Milk House is.
Yeah, the tap room will be open, rain or shine.
Yeah, beer's there, maybe tell us still something. And then on, we got our club meeting again coming up on the 11th, then, Star Party, Planetarium Show, and what's that other one? I can't read that.
That's your renewing of your
Renew by
dues.
date. If you haven't renewed, shame on you.
And thank you to everybody who did multiple years.
Yeah, renew. All right, I know, then look what's falling the next week is Cherry Springs Star Party, starting on Juneteenth and running through that Sunday, second week of Saturday. But it runs through Saturday night and then into Sunday morning, along with Social Life. I will be there doing a program on Friday and Saturday, so you're welcome to come up there and say hi. It is a very dark sky site, right? It's a very long drive, but it's a very dark sky site. I really like it. They got a good food truck there. What else is there? Oh, and usually there's some vendors. Gary, are you gonna be there? I'll be there. All right, Gary will be there. All right. So then the following weekend again, that's every Saturday of the month, we got something going on. Let's see.
What's the time to get up there, Skip? Drive time from here.
4.5 hours.
4.5, 5 hours.
Okay.
Depends on what time of day you go. Leave here at 9, you get there, you miss most of the traffic. 9 a.m. Leave there at 9 p.m., you get there next morning. They won't let you in the gate either. Are we into July yet? Let's go to July. All right, there's July. July fills up quickly. We got the carnivals, we got shore leave, we got the beginning of the state fair. Which is somewhere down there. Yeah, there we go. Starts on the state fair. The last week, which you can't see down here, is the fair. Yep. So we've got a bunch of stuff coming on there. Again, we can use help with all of it. Now, Winfield Volunteer Fire Department Carnival runs only from 6 to 10 p.m. Fireworks Friday night. I will be sending out a spreadsheet for all of these longer term events. Please sign up, even just an hour or two. We can always use your help. All right, so Kurt and I don't have to do it all. All right, and then shore leave again. Anybody ever been, shore leave's in Lancaster? They moved it due to the condemning of the Hunt Valley Marriott. The hotel is up there, was condemned.
Oh, wow.
Condemned, yeah, you see it now, it's completely fenced in, supposedly being remodeled and all this other stuff, but actually it was condemned shortly after the last shore leave. The official thing came in there and they closed it all down. But shore leave is fantastic. I don't remember, there's all kinds of people, if you want to go see aliens and strangers and movie stars and stuff like that. But it's up in Lancaster, so go up there, it's a great time. It's in the middle of town, so we're gonna look at whatever we can find during the day or at the night. But then again, there's all kinds of nifty stuff up there. Several of our members are up there as vendors. Some of them are up there just like me to basically enjoy the show. And then we have Carroll County Fair starting on the 26th. Right. I'll need at least 1 or 2 volunteers on the 25th to put up the tent and prep the building for the run of the next 7 days. So again, I'll send it out if you can sign up for it. It's not very difficult. It just needs 2 or 3 bodies to lift poles and look pretty. Then the fair starts. It runs from 10 to 10, although usually on the weekends, the only time we're there from 10 to 10. Other times we're there. If you got a couple hours in the morning, come out. You got a couple hours in the afternoon, come out. If you got a couple hours in the evening, come out. Most of our time there at the fair is 6 to 10 due to work schedules and stuff like that. And that should take us into August, right? Yeah, there you go. So now we got August, we got again the weekend stuff, the camps. We also have Milk House. I don't see on the 30th. Yeah, 30th. Right. It must be the following. Oh, no, there it is. The 22nd, Almost Heaven Star Party. Who's got tickets to the Almost Heaven Star Party? Well, that's good because they're sold out. It's actually a very good one too. They occasionally have vendors, but mainly it's a really dark sky site with great food. They have their own learning center place, that cafeteria or cooking and everything. Really good place. Next year, go to it. I'll give you a secret. If you volunteer to give a talk, you don't have to worry about registering. So,
You've given a talk?
how long has it now been, Gary? 10 years?
Yeah.
Yeah, 10 years. Yep, so I give a talk every year. Actually, I give 3 or 4, but that way I get to go. Milk House again is the end of the month, everything along with them. What you don't see up there a lot of times on the calendars, because they're not public events, is all the daycares, Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, homeschool groups, churches, and everything else that we do that's not open to the general public. They usually are posted after we do them. So check with anybody, keep an eye out. You might, because you're members, you might go to the calendars that may say private members, private, something like that, and that way it'll show us, it won't show up on the public calendar. So keep an eye out on that, make sure you're listed on there.
Please also know that every month through the end of the year, we have worked out reservation for WASI members here to observe during a dark weekend. So in this particular case, August is an example.
Yeah.
It's the whole weekend of 22nd through 24th, but do pay attention to the dates on the calendar and also the SOPs and the files.
Yeah, so we can come out here and do some.
When's the next one? I think there's one in May.
Oh, yeah, there's one every month.
Back up. Go back.
Do we still have to email you and Jack if you're coming up?
Yes, and that is our means of recording who's coming. So if there's an issue or accolades, we know who to go to. So 23rd, so that's not this weekend, but next weekend. I put in for,
Friday before Memorial Day weekend.
it's actually the
We'll try to
whole
open up
weekend.
the observatory too. A lot of people are, already curious about it.
And we want to get more people trained and also I spoke to Jeff, who's the observatory director, have the advanced class too for people putting their own cameras onto the telescope. So that includes rebalancing it, that kind of thing.
And if you have a specific object you want to see, it's that 14-inch scope, which is really good. Okay. All right, so then we got that. Again, thank you for helping us with all the outreach. There'll be more pins and awards coming up as we go. If Lori or I send you an email and ask you to fill out some information or write up a short dissertation.
I did all my 20.
Okay. All right, so again, if you can do that, that's greatly appreciated. It brings recognition to the clubs and allows us to get a bunch of other stuff and also gets recognized all over the place, right? And did we all say this last time? We all know we have a was it an eclipse ambassador or is it a solar system ambassador?
Both.
Both. We have both. And I don't know if we mentioned the last time. Would our solar system ambassador please stand up?
Jack put it in the newsletter.
Well, that's good. How many of you read the newsletter? Well, thank you. Thank you for doing that. And that is actually a prestigious honor there, young lady. Okay. So hopefully you get to,
They gave me a shiny pen.
Oh, they give you a shiny pen? Oh, they don't give you that check again anymore? They don't give you hand out those checks?
No, we're not allowed to accept money for that.
No. Well, it's not really money, it's Bitcoin. No. Yes, sir. Question.
On this subject of outreach and star parties and stuff like this. Many of us have been to local star parties, but many of us have not been to the big ones. I mean, in its heyday, Stellafane had 3,500 people show up. The biggest star party in the country was the Riverside Telescope Makers Convention, which is no longer because for finances. But the people at Stellafane, the same people that 30 and 40 years ago used to spend 2 weeks cleaning up, putting the camp back together so they can host the convention. Those are the same people that are now 70 years old and they don't like getting out and camping, doing bathing in cold weather and stuff like that. And they're having a hard time finding volunteers that are younger. There has been mumblings at Stellafane that they may be thinking about wrapping it up, or in terms of scaling it down considerably or changing it. It is an event. It is the Hajj for amateur astronomers. Many people I talk to, they say, well, I'll do it someday. I'll do it someday. You're running out of some days. There will be this will be a big one. It's the last week of July this year. But you might see it change dramatically and less historical than it used to be. In 4 weeks, there's Cherry Springs, which you just spoke about. It took some heroic efforts and some speeches at the Pennsylvania State House to try to get a star party for this year. The Department of Pennsylvania Department of Natural Resources took over administration in a different way, and they have a new person that is very cash oriented, and they thought that they could do a better job, so they kicked out both the Cherry Springs and the Black Forest Star Party and says we'll do it. And some people came to the senses and says no, it's a little harder than you think it is. And Cherry Springs is saved for this year. Black Forest is saved for this year, and possibly Cherry Springs for next year. But after that, they may not exist, at least in the form that we're used to. So if you're thinking about going to a really dark sky site, this is truly a really dark sky site in terms of East Coast. You might want to think about moving your schedule up a little bit. To give you an idea of how dark it is, I got up in the middle of the night, like most old guys do. I got up and started walking around, and I noticed that my body was casting about a 40-foot shadow. And I thought, like, the moon's up. I turned around, and it was Venus. Venus was casting a 40-foot shadow. It was so dark to the rest of the sky. I saw what I thought was the clouds coming in from the east, and so everybody would have to put away their telescopes in the morning. I thought the view was coming in. They said no, we were watching the Milky Way rise over the horizon.
I've had that experience there.
And for those who have not been to a dark sky site, Spruce Knob in Pennsylvania and Virginia,
West Virginia.
thank you, and Cherry Springs in Pennsylvania are the real sites. But we're running out. We are a generational hobby, and time is catching up to some of us, and they have changed. The star parties will change accordingly. So think about it if you've got time.
Yeah, come out to all of them. I go to them, as many of them as I can. And I already told work, gave them the dates off. I said, I'm sorry, I'm not gonna be around these days. I'm gonna go see what the sky looks like when it's not all light blue. So,
Yeah. Give you an idea how popular they are. Cherry Springs is 550 people. That is the fire department's limit. And Cherry Springs, they opened up registration for tickets at 9 o'clock one morning, and 45 minutes later, all 550 tickets were gone.
and almost 7 star parties, only 250 people.
Yeah.
And it was already gone when they opened it. So,
How much were the tickets?
I think that they were $35 or $40 there.
they're not very much.
Yeah, they're not very much.
Camping on site, bathrooms on site.
The camping's extra.
Is it? I think, I don't know. I'm a
Not-
speaker
not-
guest, so I don't know.
Not at Cherry Springs, but at Stellafane it is.
That's why I volunteered to talk and give presentations. Oh, bomb. I like doing it for free. Okay, anything else? Lori, are you ready for?
Door prizes, are
Door
there
prizes.
any officers present that have an opinion on any of the ballots for the AL? Any objections to, okay, good. Also, if anybody is interested in hand stamping our URL into any handouts that we have, you can check it out. I've bought extra, let me know. So we got 4 door prizes. We also have lots of vintage Hubble posters.
Antiques. Historic.
No, vintage.
Oh, vintage, okay,
Yeah.
okay.
All right.
Right.
So our
Classic.
first door prize is a patch, a sticker, and a flashlight with a compass, and it goes to Fisher.
Who?
Fisher.
Hey, there you go. Congratulations. All right.
Okay, same
Excellent.
thing.
Same thing.
Number
2.
three is goes to Foster.
Foster.
Then we have
There's a whistle just in case.
the IMAX Hubble poster that was given to us by the Hubble speaker we had this past year, and a vintage poster. That one goes to ticket number Bridges 621.
Oh, that's me.
Oh, okay.
Well, thank you.
All right, then the grand prize,
Grand prize is the metal earth. Ooh.
I know. It's a courtesy of the Ansorges. A lot of tickets in there, so which one should I pull?
Recent.
One with the chewing gum.
The one with the chewing gum, 11 stuck to the bottom. Will Corny is not here because he had to leave.
Well, all right. Gotta be
Must
present
be
to win.
present to win. It's in the stated published rules,
And.
631.
Hey.
Too much.
Oh,
Never too. Okay. Actually,
There we go. There you go, sir.
we could draw for these posters out of these
Okay,
tickets.
yeah,
And
yeah.
if you don't want it, that's fine. We
All right.
can roll out of tickets.
Consolation
there.
prize, we'll take another one.
So, 633,
633.
would you like it?
I don't have a place for it.
Okay, next.
You want a little metal? Just gotta let me do it.
Fisher's already got one, sorry. Ken Donovan. is he still here?
Ken? Nope.
Will Frankie. 635.
Maybe one person is surrounded. Who would like, who would like?
Who would like it?
First one to stand up, get the posters.
Nobody wants the.
Well, that answers that question.
The poster does not have feelings. Okay, was there anything, everybody signed in, I hope?
This the one,
Oh, okay.
this, it's been so scorned. Nobody
Really?
likes it anymore.
Spurn.
Burn.
You can hold that up.
Yeah.
Yeah. This is what you're missing out on. It is a current poster, which is saying something that the posters we have.
Yes, yes.
No takers.
Okay.
It's not easy to frame.
What's that?
It's not easy to frame.
Actually, there is one quick tip. And that is if you get one of those like 24 by 36 frames that opens 4 sides on the front, you can store your posters safely and change it out and only take up the wall space. Ask me how I know.
How do you know that?
Are we
Lord?
done? Are we done?
Are we done?
Everybody like the refreshments we had this time? It seemed to be ahead? Okay, we'll keep going.
Okay.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much. See you next time.
Trying to want to read it.
Might be, I'll make sure the phones for tomorrow. See where we're at.
Thank you very much for the safety.
Yeah, it is.
All right, thank you, everybody. We are going to end the call.
Oh, be sure it works.